caste is at the center stage of the debate that has erupted between the opposition and the BJP in Parliament. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. It all began with Rahul Gandhi holding up this picture of the budget and the traditional budget halwa, in which he demanded to know, or basically insinuated, that that picture was not socially inclusive. In fact, he spoke about what the caste representation of that picture, the team surrounding the finance minister, might be. That led to the BJP launching a scathing attack led by Anurag Thakur, former minister, back at Rahul Gandhi. The Congress has in fact moved a privilege motion after the Prime Minister also backed Anurag Thakur's remarks in which he demanded to know what Rahul Gandhi's caste was. In all of this, Rahul Gandhi has maintained that the opposition's demand for a caste census will not stop. In the midst of it all, Rahul Gandhi has actually said that he is now expecting a raid by the Enforcement Directorate because of his comments made in this speech and other speeches in Parliament. Alongside all of this, we have the Supreme Court delivering a landmark judgment, basically allowing for a sub-classification to take place within scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and also advocating for the exclusion of creamy layer within SC/ST groups when it comes to reservations. This, if implemented, could lead to a dramatic change in India's quota policy and also India's quota politics. Students of politics might look at everything that's going on and say it's back to the future. Some of us who are old enough to remember have been in this place before, where the debate used to be, can Mandal counter Kamandal? Can caste politics counter Hindutva? The BJP then said it would embrace both. But the results of election 2024 do reveal that the opposition is trying to build its politics on a larger plank of social justice. Something very interesting is shifting in the political sands here. Joining us today is Yogendra Yadav. Yogendra Yadav has a very interesting piece out today on the Supreme Court judgment, but he's here to talk about the caste census and the caste politics debate as we're seeing unfold both inside and outside Parliament. Namaskar, Yogendra ji. Let me actually start by asking you about the caste census. How it has come to be such a political hot potato, such a big talking point, why it matters. And not everything that matters has electoral resonance. In fact, in the assembly elections that came before the Lok Sabha elections, the caste census was presented as a big issue and it didn't necessarily seem to have much of a sort of electoral return on the ground. Why has the caste census become the major plank for the opposition forces, for opposition supporters like yourself?
Barkha, I think we should begin by saying that India has not only witnessed one of the most insidious kind of inequality in the world, that represented by the caste system. India in the last 75 years has also witnessed one of the largest, and dare I say, one of the most successful instances of affirmative action policy. You know, the reservation, which is debated very loosely in all kinds of circles, what we forget is all over the world, it is one of the most successful and effective affirmative action policies. It is better than what you have in the US, better than what you have in Malaysia. It's been similar policies have been tried. So we are looking at a very large, fairly successful policy. We need to fine tune. And I see the demand for caste census and the latest judgment of the Supreme Court, which came yesterday, as move towards fine-tuning, improving, and rationalizing this policy of affirmative action that India should be proud of. Let's remember that the debate on caste census did not begin with Rahul Gandhi. After 1992 judgment of the Indira Sahni judgment of the Supreme Court, when the court said OBC reservations are all right. Now, the first thing required after that was to count the OBCs. And it was a national scandal that we had a policy giving reservation in jobs and education, jobs at that time, to a social group which we did not count. I mean, Barkha, you would not find a single country in the world that has a legal provision for some particular section of society, which it does not count in the census. So In 1999, when Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government was in power, the Ministry of Social Justice proposed, let's have caste census. The then Registrar General of Census, Mr. Unni, wrote a long technical note saying why caste census was an imperative. It was rejected. 2010, you would recall, you and I are old enough to remember all these things. The Lok Sabha debated it for 2 full days and came to a unanimous conclusion that it should happen. Different political parties, including the BJP, Mr. Munde, Ms. Sushma Swaraj, was so vociferous and eloquent in their support for caste census. Parties gave written undertaking, demanded from the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh that there should be a caste census. Cut to 2018, Mr. Rajnath Singh was the Home Minister. He assured on the floor of the Parliament and then official communique that in 2021 we will do OBC. OBC will be included in the census of the country. The National Commission for Backward Castes has demanded it. A parliamentary committee on social justice has demanded it, all under this government. BJP in Bihar has supported caste census in Bihar and taken the credit for it. And now we have a situation where we are told caste census is somehow anti-national, somehow divisive, that it's only the Congress which is asking for it. That is never the case. So let's put that in perspective. Rahul Gandhi is not the first person to ask for it. There is almost a national consensus for it. However, when it comes to doing it, it faces a sabotage. You and I can guess what the reasons for that sabotage may have been.
Okay. Now you have laid out a kind of commonsensical argument that how can you draft policy for groups that you haven't fully counted? And I think that at just a pure apolitical, commonsensical plank makes absolute sense. But we live in a country where we can't divorce politics from anything. So when Rahul Gandhi holds up that particular picture of the budget halwa in parliament, and he actually says, look, tell us the caste composition of this picture. Is it really inclusive? Is it really inclusive in a social way? And the BJP leaders, counter saying, what is the caste composition of, let's say, the board of the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation? We now have a moment where many say, we are back to the future. We are back to the 90s politics where the BJP's Hindutva is being countered by the opposition sensing that on this larger plank of social groups, caste groups that may be underrepresented, that is what the opposition will build its politics on. I'm not saying that's wrong or right. I'm just asking if that is the way you see it as well.
Barkha, in fact, that's the most important thing. Let's keep focusing on whether it's wrong or right, because for me, that's what matters most. Who benefits from it? These are very small questions which will be settled by history. The real issue is whether it's right or wrong. We are not moving back to anything, Barkha. People like you have been at the forefront of it. When we now object to menace on television, which is to say a set of 5 or 6 male giving gyan to the world, we say it's a male. Why don't you have a woman? Can't they speak? Don't they have opinion? When we say so, are we moving backwards? No, I think we're moving forward. In the context of US, in the context of South Africa, in racially divided society, when someone says, why is there no black? Why are there no Hispanics? Now in the American context, where are Indian Americans? We are not moving back. We are moving forward in a society which is more inclusive, more sensitive, which is careful about social justice. Similarly, if someone asks, who are these policymakers? Forget the exact details and so on. The point is not about those 10 gentlemen and so on. The important question is, budget is a critical document of this country. And who are those who are framing the budget? It's a question worth asking. And if it happens to be people who were all from one very limited social background, the country needs to know. This is a very legitimate question. And I'm my own sense, if we go by political rhetoric, halwa kaun banata hai? Halwa kaun baantata hai? Halwa kisko baanta jata hai? these are some of the most important questions of our times. And I personally, I mean, while earthy metaphors are not Rahul Gandhi's forte, but in this particular instance, I think he got it absolutely right. You can say this in a village, everyone would understand. You can say it in a basti, you can say it in a drawing room. Everyone understands it. It is an important question. For far too long, we have shied away from questions of this kind, which is not to say that every individual can and should be reduced only to their caste identity or their gender identity or their racial identity. You know,
So
but
you
it's a
said
group. Yeah.
No, you said that what should matter is not whether party A or party B seeks political benefit, but whether it is right or wrong. Now, here is the question. Pratap Bhanu Mehta, whose column you must have read, he makes the argument that there's something reductionist in the opposition politics in Rahul Gandhi's intervention. In fact, the exact phrase he uses is caste politics is social justice on the cheap. He says caste politics has become a kind of camouflage. Now I'm paraphrasing, a kind of camouflage for certain poor policy decisions. Now, he acknowledges in the first half of the article caste privilege and so on. But he also says that it's a kind of virtue signaling by those who typically are from privileged castes to now embrace this in a kind of belated way. But also, he has a problem. He takes issue with Rahul Gandhi's approach to this budget movement. It is a it is a thin line, even as a woman, since you brought up manners. It is a thin line. Do I always want to be prefixed as a woman journalist? At the same time, I acknowledge that I have to work harder. I'll be scrutinized more sharply. It's an unequal world. But do I always, I want to be known as one of India's most consequential journalists, not just as India's consequential woman journalist. So Pratap's argument, how do you counter that this is social justice on the cheap?
There's no need to counter that, Barkha. I think it's a larger argument about politics of presence. In the earlier times, you would say, you should be just, no matter who does it. Jyoti Basu had once famously said, how does it matter that there's no Dalit in my cabinet? I'm their representative. Those days are gone. Now we believe politics of presence matters. If you want to talk about Afro Americans, you need Afro Americans there. To talk about women, you need women there. So, yes, does it open up to possibility of tokenism? Indeed, it does. Does getting a woman finance minister mean better quality of life for women? Well, we know the answer in this country already, don't we? Does having a president from minority community or a president from Adivasi community change their fate? No, it doesn't necessarily do so. There is also a danger of virtue signaling, which is quite truly the case. And there is a danger of reductionism, which is to say, you are a woman, you must speak for women. Because I happen to have a beard, I cannot speak about women. I mean, those stupid things do happen all the time. And this is not merely in the case of caste. This happens on politics of race. This happens on politics of gender. This happens on everything. So yes, we need to be careful. The following care needs to be taken. Number one, that you cannot reduce every individual's opinions to their social base. Before you criticize someone, first prove that their argument is wrong, bad, a lie, and then talk about their social base. Then you can say they are speaking a lie because. But you cannot begin by saying because he's a man, he must be a liar. Because he's a Brahmin, he must be diabolic. No, you can't do that. The danger of tokenism has to be checked by demanding consistency, by demanding consequences. All right, you have a tribal as the president of this country, and I feel very proud of it. But let me also see what has happened to Adivasis in Niyamgiri. Let me see what's happened to Adivasis in Chhattisgarh. Why are Adivasi women still being killed quite openly? So you demand not just faces, you demand consequences. And of course, you demand consistency. So if they want to know what is the social profile of Rajiv Gandhi Foundation, or tomorrow, if they say what is the social profile of Congress's own organization or Congress's tickets, these are absolutely valid questions. They are bound to be asked. You cannot get away from these questions. So I would only take what Pratap says 2 steps forward. And I would only say that, yes, all these dangers are real. The solution is not, therefore, to shy away from questions of caste, but to actually confront them, take them forward. Yes, do ask. By all means, we should say, all right, you want caste census. Show me, why have you not done it? Why are you not doing it? You want
Okay.
better representation. Why not in your own party? All these are, so these debates must go forward, not back.
So here's my question. We all studied, read about, were inspired by Baba Saheb Ambedkar's idea of the annihilation of caste. Um, how did we go from seeking eventually in an idealized world the annihilation of caste to basically, some might argue, institutionalizing, legitimizing caste stratification? Now, I ask this question fully aware that were I Dalit, I would never have the luxury to even contemplate the annihilation of caste. I ask this question knowing that as a young student in college, if asked what is your caste, I would say I don't know, and that is an answer that only a privileged person can give. But what happened to our idea of the annihilation of caste?
Barkha, that is where the fundamental misunderstanding lies, and I'm glad you've asked this question. Because the route to, I mean, annihilation of caste must be our national motto. I'm not for a moment saying we should, it's not practical and so on and so forth. No, this is a national ideal for everyone. Annihilation of caste would mean annihilation of a system of caste inequalities. This must be our motto. But the question is,
Mhm.
how do we go about doing it? So here is a college. There are girls, there are boys. Uh, you hear some murmurs among girls. How do you go about resolving this? Do you say, I don't know, boys or girls, I treat everyone equally, I don't know? Or do you say, no, there are girls in the college, maybe they have special difficulties. Let me understand who they are, what their difficulties are. So, or in the US, I'm deliberately taking examples other than caste, just to bring commonsensical
Mm.
points home. In the US, do you say, I don't recognize white or black? Or do you begin by counting how many blacks we have? Do we have black judges? Do we have black university professors? And if not, what should be done about it? The basic point I'm making is, if you want to dismantle any system of inequality, the first step you take is not close your eyes, but to open your eyes, recognize that category, count it, assess what kind of disadvantages, discriminations that might exist, and then plan to dismantle it. So the route to annihilation of caste is not by pretending that no one in this country from tomorrow know what their caste is, but by recognizing caste, by counting it, by systematically understanding disadvantages, and then making policies to address it. And this is
Now,
what caste census is all about. Caste census is a diagnostic tool. It is not a policy, and it's a diagnostic tool which is agnostic, which is irrelevant to the kind of medicine you may prefer. And even those who hate caste-based reservations, if they are honest in their opposition, then they should demand caste census, because most people don't even understand what caste census is. And allow me a
do
minute to
you
simply say what it is. Caste census is not some grand, unique, unprecedented mega exercise which we are inaugurating. Caste census is merely about adding one column, just one column, to the existing questionnaire of census that is taken to every single household of this country. Please remember that the census, as it has been practiced for the last 7 decades in our country after independence, has always asked someone's caste. So when it comes to your house, Barkha, the teacher, she would say, Aapki jati kya hai? You would say that, she would say, Acha Brahmin hai. And she would
mm,
tick a general box. That's all.
mm,
She would come to my house and say, Acha, aap Yadav hain. She would tick general, because so far there's not even an OBC box in the column, in the census. But if she were to go to the house of an Adivasi, she would say, Acha, aap Meena hai. she would tick ST box and record me now. So please remember, all that I'm asking for is that when the teacher comes to your house and my house, she would, in your case, she would tick general and write Dutt Brahmin. In my case, she would tick OBC and say Yadav. That's all it requires. So it's a very small
What if you
administrative.
and I choose? What if you and I choose? And again, I keep saying it is a position of privilege, but what if you and I choose to not be identified by our caste? For example,
I
remember days I
completely
don't.
understand, Barkha. The
I would
problem,
not. I would not. I would prefer not. So I understand I have to be counted as general because I am not entitled to any of the state policies that are meant for marginalized groups. But what if I don't want to be identified
it's
by
perfectly
my
all right,
caste?
Barkha. What we don't understand is the trouble is so few people understand census. So please remember that the person would also ask for your religion. Now, if you happen to be someone who doesn't believe in any religion, you
Yeah.
can, even today, for the last 70 years, you have always had the option of saying, I'm atheist, I'm agnostic. You could also say, I'm a constitutionalist. You could say, I'm a whatever Wadi. You can give whatever answer you wish to. This would be perfectly all right. The only thing is that you would, if you do not get yourself put in any of the SC, ST, OBC box, then you would not be entitled to any privileges. So what you are saying hypothetically would be perfectly the case with my own children, because we have
Yes.
decided not to give them any caste name. So if the person comes, they would say, we don't know, put us in general. But then tomorrow they would not be able to claim any benefits, which is perfectly all right. So this actually poses no problem whatsoever.
Okay, in that case, why have we seen in this past week such a big quarrel between the BJP and the Congress over Rahul Gandhi's caste, right? You saw that play out. And today we've had BJP leaders saying that if there is a caste census, then Rahul Gandhi would, like you and me, either he would choose to say, I don't choose to identify this way. And and you leave that column either vacant or in general or whatever you leave it in, but they have targeted him for his either for his caste being unknown or for his refusal to answer the question. And the Congress has moved a privilege motion because the Prime Minister actually backed the comments of Mr. Anurag Thakur when he said jiski jaat pata nahi and so on. Now, without getting into the personalized sort of quarrel between the two political leaders, my question to you is, are our politicians, our public figures who are advocating for a caste census obliged to say this is my caste? And should they take umbrage if they're asked that question?
I simply don't see the connect. As I said, in my case, I have decided, my wife and I, we decided we don't want to call our children Yadav or Banerjee or Yadav Banerjee. Because we don't believe in caste. But to
Correct.
say that I don't believe in caste does not mean that because I do not believe in caste, caste has disappeared from this country. No, so I
Agreed.
can do both the things. A, not believe in caste and demand caste-based assessment, caste-based, because that is a category. If I and you don't believe in race, for example, does race cease to exist in the US? So there is absolutely no contradiction between these two things. And this entire
But
stuff that's going on in Lok Sabha, you know what the undertone is. When a Thakur gets up and says, Tumhari jaat kya hai? This has very different meaning in India. And I'm afraid that's what BJP is doing.
he is saying it not to somebody from a so-called, he's also saying it to a person of a fellow privileged caste.
A fellow privileged class, but probably not fellow privileged caste. In the classical Indian text, good or bad, there was Anulom Vivah and Pratilom Vivah. Anulom Vivah would be when a man of a higher caste would marry someone from a lower or outcast. And remember, all the foreigners were considered outcasts, or anyone not Hindu was considered outcast. So I think that's what they are playing on, the Anulom and Prati. They know their text very well, BJP people. And what they are really trying to say is where you don't quite belong. You are, so that's basically what they're playing on. And it's actually this is not very different from what Trump is doing to Kamala Harris right now.
Mm, interesting parallel there, but I have a question, and that is a political question. You say that, when a Thakur gets up and questions Rahul Gandhi in this way, the clear subtext is that Rahul Gandhi, being of mixed ethnicity and so on, there is a questioning there in the way that Trump is doing with Harris. Okay, that's your argument. But the Congress itself, Rahul Gandhi himself, has taken some time to reach this position. And that's fine. The BJP is quoting from his old speeches in 2004. If you found my old writings in 19, when was I in college? In 1992, I was absolutely opposed to Mandal because I didn't understand anything about caste politics. And I was of that generation of university students, Yogendra ji, and I'm embarrassed about that position today. कि मुझे कुछ उस समय, can I come out of these pictures, please? उस समय मुझे कुछ समझ नहीं आता था. I came from a very cocooned environment. I only knew one St. Stephen's College reality. तो लगता था ये caste reservation सब बहुत गलत चीज है. But so people's positions can evolve. My own position has evolved. But you will remember an election, I don't remember which one it was, when a Congress leader referenced, quote unquote, the sacred thread of Rahul Gandhi, right? So all I'm trying to argue is that the Congress position on this has not exactly been consistent.
One is Rahul Gandhi's position, second is Congress's position. And whatever Rahul Gandhi has said, the one thing that doesn't quite fit in with that is that Dattatreya Brahmin thing. I don't know him that intimately, but whatever I know of him, that simply doesn't go with his character. And I don't know, obviously he needs to explain. And I'm sure you'd be able to ask him. But
you remember the Janyudhari Brahmin reference that I think Randeep Surjewala had made.
That doesn't quite go with the person that I have known. It's out of sorts, completely out of sorts with that. The other statements that he has made about, I believe in a system where caste doesn't exist, etc. All that is perfectly compatible with what he's saying today. But that Brahmin and Janayudhari stuff, that doesn't quite go with what he's professing today. But as you said, everyone evolves and everyone should evolve. In my own case, I must confess that in 2008 and 9, I was not in favor of a full caste census. I was only advocating OBC census, that apart from SC and ST, OBC must also be included. It's only after reading Satish Deshpande that I actually converted to the idea of a full caste census, because till then I saw caste census as an instrument for documenting and understanding the disadvantages of the underprivileged. Satish Deshpande drew my attention to the stark fact that unless you unmask the privileges, unless you unmask the privilege of the privileged, there's no point talking about disadvantage of the remaining. And that, I suspect, Barkha, is why we have so much opposition. There are, I can identify some things in this country. You speak to ordinary people, rational, sensible, liberal, decent people. You speak to them about all kinds of things, they would be all right. But you speak to them about Muslims, speak to them about Kashmir, speak to them about caste, and about women, you suddenly see a different face and you begin to wonder, अच्छा ये वही आदमी था क्या जिससे 10 मिनट पहले बात हो रही थी? Or am I speaking to a new person? Caste happens to be one of those things.
But I want to. This is something that Pratap also said in his column, and I also think. I think one of the. I don't have a problem with the caste census. I think the more information we have, the better it is for policy making. So there can be no per se objection to a caste census. Caste is a reality of India. How we choose to annihilate that, the bias and the prejudices of that reality is where the debate is. But Pratap Bhanu Mehta argues, and I think I agree, that is the danger in the politics that is playing out right now, the conflation between Dalit communities and OBC communities, right? I think we can agree when he raises these questions for Rahul Gandhi and for people like yourselves, that what the Dalits and the Adivasis, the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes of this country have gone through and continue to go through cannot be compared with other backward classes. And this politics of social justice, the broad plank today, is equating them, conflating them, and that is the problem, is it not?
There is absolutely no doubt that the conditions of Dalits as one category cannot be compared to OBC as a category. And the two of these cannot be compared to ST as a category. There cannot also be a doubt that internally all these three boxes are very heterogeneous. OBC is in fact one of the most heterogeneous category. People who are on the one end, you have landed peasants who could be quite compared to the upper class. And on the other hand, at the bottom, you have artisan communities, which are worse than Dalits in this country. In the case of scheduled caste, the Dalits, as yesterday's judgment has shown, there is a huge disparity within that. In fact, even a relationship of untouchability vis-a-vis each other within Dalits. And in the case of scheduled tribe, there is a world of difference between scheduled tribes of the Northeast and the scheduled tribes of mainland India, and then difference. So we are dealing with huge differences. There should be no conflation. And especially, of course, OBC cannot be compared to SC, ST, certainly. So if there is conflation, that's bad. But if there is attempt at unity, that's what we need. I've been arguing. And so in my case, I can make my position absolutely clear. My position is that what this country needs is bottom of the pyramid, politics of bottom of the pyramid. In that bottom of the pyramid, you have OBC, SC, ST. You have poor from the privileged community. You have women cutting across all castes and communities. This is the bottom of the pyramid. It is my stated agenda, open, declared policy, strategy, conspiracy, call it what you want, to forge a unity of all these disadvantaged groups. And if this is what Congress wants to do, if this is what Rahul Gandhi wants to do, I would not call it conflation. I would call it an attempt at unity. Attempt at unity can only be made by acknowledging differences. You cannot, in
Okay.
a Uttar Pradesh village, go and say Yadavs and Dalits are bhai, they are together. They are not. You have to acknowledge the difference. You have to acknowledge the tension, even animosity. Sort it out, and then work towards you.
Let's in the end look at the Supreme Court judgment that has come in the middle of all of this political debate. That does two things. One, it allows for the subclassification of castes within SCST, but it also backs for excluding the creamy layer from scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Now, so far, this creamy layer concept has only applied to OBC groups, right? And we even have questions in our audience stream saying that if you remove the creamy layer, will it serve the imperative of removing the stigmatization? That has been the old debate of Dalit and tribal communities, that creamy layer concept cannot be applied to us because social stigma is very different irrespective of our class. And of course, there are others in our Kalpana believes that we're going back by all this talk about caste, by doubling down and tripling down on caste identities. My question to you is, in your column, you welcomed this judgment as a landmark judgment. Are you on board? And I've read your column, but there are others in our audience who may not. So I'm asking this question. This exclusion of creamy layers, it actually will change how our reservation policy is applied. And there's been very little, very muted political response to it. I'm very curious why. It's a radical judgment.
Barkha, let's separate two parts of the judgment. One is the main judgment, which is what the real dispute was. This creamy layer was not actually even a question formulated for the court. So let's set that aside. The main question before the court was, can you split SC/ST quota between more advanced and less advanced, more disadvantaged, less disadvantaged categories? This has been a standard problem in the country. So first major step was towards recognizing that, yes, we have something called scheduled castes who are disadvantaged. They need special affirmative action schemes. Having worked those schemes within 30, 40 years, it was quite clear that most benefits were flowing to those castes and communities which had, for historical accidental reasons, had slightly earlier access to modern education, which had occupations that allowed them to move forward. They were not conspirators. It's just that historical accident happened to have favored them slightly more than others. Take the case of Balmikis in North India. The community which has been, where Sapai Karamcharis come out, with traditional occupation is scavenging. Now, the simple fact, and you can check it anywhere in North India, go to any state and look at the IAS officers who come from IAS officers, or forget IAS officer, look at clerks, look at school teachers who come from SC quota. You would rarely find someone for Valmiki community, even in those states where they are 1/3 of the Dalit population, states like Haryana and Punjab. You don't find them. And there have been similar disputes all over. This is exactly the Mala Madhika dispute in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Malas are ahead, Madhikas have been left behind. In Karnataka, they have a peculiar name for it. They call right and left. SC right, SC left. SC right have moved up, SC left have been left behind. Everywhere in the country, there has been inequality. And many state governments recognized it. They formed policies. Haryana did it, Punjab did it, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh. But through a very technical judgment in 2004, the Supreme Court said this is illegal. All SCs are one homogeneous category. The moment you subdivide, you are touching the schedule, which are constitutionally not permitted. That's an ultra technical, ultra formalistic thing. And unfortunately, it took 20 years to overrule that. I think it's a very welcome judgment because it recognizes, and it's a move towards equality. When the moment you see people in unequal situation, treating them differently is not a move towards inequality, it's a move towards equality. It's a very good judgment, positive judgment, especially because the judges have not given political arbitrary power to the governments to do what they like, because the governments would wish to play to divide the Dalit community. The Supreme Court clearly says, come up with evidence, come up with rational justifications, only then can you subclassify. The court has not ordered them to do subclassification. Court has only permitted them.
Allowed them. Allowed them. Yeah. How will you avoid a situation where the subclassification occurs along electoral calculations?
This has always been the case. In the case of OBCs, for example, governments have said it. These matters have gone to the court, and the simple question is, show me evidence. That's what the courts have always asked. And the moment evidence is asked, you don't get the evidence, then you actually know what these are challenged in courts of law. And when these things are challenged in courts of law, sorry,
that's your phone. No problem. Yeah,
some alarm got triggered. When these things get challenged in court of law, the court simply says, "Give us, show us."
You can say, "Usko band kar lijiye," then we can carry on. It wo bachta rahega, and I'm not able to focus. हाँ जी, हो गया बंद हो गया. हाँ जी. You're saying when it's challenged in a court of law.
So when this happens, it will be challenged in court of law, and the court will say, "Show me evidence." And if there is no evidence, if you cannot show evidence that one particular group is ahead, the other is behind substantially, so as to merit being put in different groups, those things are quashed. So that's the SC/ST subclassification thing, which I personally have supported it. I know this has been objected to. The difficulty is that you cannot, sometimes the proponents of non-classification use arguments which have been used against reservation in the first place. देश समाज की एकता टूट जाएगी, but that's exactly the argument used against reservation in the first place. So I would say let's not use those arguments. There is a real problem, there is a real disadvantage. I have personally been working with Valmiki communities for the last 17 years, and I know how bad the situation is. So that's
fair
really
enough, but on the creamy layer, yeah,
come to the creamy layer part of it. Number one, as Gautam Bhatia has pointed out, it's not quite clear if it is part of the judgment itself, because these are observations made by the court, by 4 judges. This was not one of the questions to be answered. So, for example, Justice Chandrachud has not even referred to this because he did not think this was a question to be answered. It was not an issue listed. So these are, according to Gautam Bhatia, these are observations of judges which do not necessarily constitute a judgment, but there is an apprehension. The apprehension is, if 4 out of 7 judges express an observation, it has a power, it has a weight, and it will be used in different high courts to say, well, and the apprehension is this, that tomorrow, let us say the state of Haryana, does subclassification, which is bound to happen in Haryana and Punjab, and it goes to the High Court, the court might say, but have you done creamy layer exclusion? If you haven't done it, we won't approve it. And they can cite the 4 judges in the Supreme Court. So there is that application. What is the problem?
What
The
is your
problem, to
what
my
is your
mind,
own view on creamy layer? Because the
on
classic argument is a Dalit with power, let's say someone from a political family or someone with great wealth, should not have the benefit of reservation because they are no longer marginalized. There have been earlier formulations that have suggested a generational cap, that you allow it for one generation, then you cap it. But surely it is fair to say that if you have power and wealth, that does not or should not put you in the same category as those who have neither.
yeah, so in principle, I am in favor of exclusion or reduction of those who enjoy privileges within the underprivileged community. In principle, yes. So therefore, when the question of creamy layer for OBC came up, I did not oppose it. I said, in principle, this is a very ham-handed formula, but something is better, some way to communicate. And in order to keep a certain national consensus in favor of reservations, it's absolutely important for everyone to see that some very evidently privileged people are being excluded from the benefits. How
And
do you
and and
do it?
may
I
I
have
and,
two.
and may I sorry, may I just interject to say that we recently saw Pooja Khedkar's example, someone who fibbed her economic status to get access to an OBC affirmative action for as an aspirant to the Indian Administrative Service. So what the reason I'm bringing this example up, Yogendra ji, is because you're speaking of a national consensus on reservations. Now there are people who look at reservations as quotas that are also abused by those who don't need them, while not being able to benefit those who really need them, which is why you have, for example, so many vacant posts where quota there is affirmative action, but because socio-economic indices have not kept pace, you don't have enough qualified people to fill those posts.
Yeah. So I'll skip Pooja's case for the time being because it's a case of pure fraudulence. And fraudulence of
Correct.
any kind, wherever it takes place, should be thrown out. But I have
Correct.
2 points to make on the creamy layer for SCST. Number one, I mean, in principle, the idea of excluding some overprivileged people is a good idea. To do it via creamy layer would require 2 things. Number one, we cannot have the same definition for creamy layer in the case of scheduled caste as we have in the case of OBC. In the case of OBC, it's a straightforward definition. If your income is high, if you have any class 1 position, then you are at advantage. In the case of OBC, we are looking at advantage and disadvantage. In the case of scheduled caste, we are looking at stigmatization, discrimination. So the bar of creamy layer would have to be kept so high, which is to say, are you so privileged that generations of stigmatization must have been wiped out? That is how I would put that bar. Number two, and that's very important, that don't, I mean, having defined creamy layer, whichever way you have, do not exclude them. Just put them at the bottom of the queue. That's an important, and just to respond to the point you have made, that's been my suggestion for quite some time. Define creamy layer, privileged people should be put at the end of the queue. So if you have vacancies still left, let's say there are 100 vacancies, and I could find only 60 eligible candidates, 40 are still left. If 40 seats are left, well, let the so-called privilege and creamy layer from the SC come in. But if 100 seats are exhausted, well, thank you very much. Nothing left for you. Go and compete in the general category. So that's how it should be done. Otherwise, the danger is precisely what you mentioned. The danger is, especially in the higher services, when it comes to professors, doctors, engineers, and scientists, most often you would have a reserved position, and the interview board will say no candidate found suitable. In some cases, that could actually be the case. And in some cases, this could be a ploy to keep reservation quota blank, empty. And my fear
Yeah.
is that the moment creamy layer is introduced, the eligible pool will become even smaller than it is today. And therefore, all the more reasons and all the more temptation and possibility of then saying no candidate found suitable, it should be transferred to general category. That should not be permitted.
Let me end with asking you about the politics. You said in the middle or in the beginning that the politics shouldn't matter. What should matter is whether it's right or wrong. But you are in politics. I report on politics. How do we look away from the fact that what seems to be unfolding here is also, you can call it ideology, you can call it strategy, but a point of differentiation between the BJP and those opposed to it, where the BJP might seek to consolidate the Hindu vote, and the opposition may seek to splinter it by doubling and tripling down on caste. How do you respond to this sort of return in the headlines of the caste versus Hindutva trope?
But I don't look away from caste. The only reason when from politics, the only reason I object once in a while is when people substitute it for an argument about justification. Is caste census a good idea or a bad idea? That cannot be settled by whose political motives would be served. Because in democratic politics, every single policy has a political motive. It should have a political motive. When Nitish Kumar does something for girl child in Bihar, gives them bicycle, he has to get, he stands to
Sure.
gain from it, and you cannot object to that policy on the basis that Nitish Kumar will gain. So the only strange thing is when it comes to caste census and when people run out of arguments, the final argument is nahi politics hai ye to. Are baba, everything is politics. When Narendra Modi gives 10 kg of rice, well, that's also politics. So that's the only objection on the caste, on the politics part of it. I think what this country has witnessed is the following. BJP has developed a social coalition of the privileged. If this country is a pyramid, BJP has managed to pick the top of the top triangle of the pyramid. Is something BJP has captured almost 100%. We don't call it vote bank because somehow we don't refer to ourselves as vote bank. Everyone else is a vote bank. I cannot be a vote bank. The simple fact is that upper caste Hindus of this country are the most loyal vote bank of the BJP. But that's too small. BJP won't win on the basis of that. So what the BJP has done is that it having captured that base completely, the top of the pyramid completely, BJP takes up some slices from the EBC, a little from Pasmanda Muslims, some from the Mahadalits and so on. That's how BJP has manufactured its majority. The response to that has to be a new social coalition. And what is that? And BJP has used this very peculiar kind of social alliance to protect and to shield its absolutely brazen anti-Muslim politics, communal politics, and its anti-democratic agenda. So what should be the agenda of democratic forces? You cannot simply say, save democracy, save constitution. That is not how you fight these battles. You fight these battles by creating an alternative coalition. And that coalition will have to be a coalition of the bottom of the pyramid. And if Congress, I don't know if the Congress is doing so, but if Congress is doing so, if India Bloc is doing so, I can only applaud and welcome it. The only point I would wish to do is to remind everyone that this social bottom of the pyramid is not merely jatis. Please remember that in the upper caste of India, at least half of them are very poor,
I
very
was going
poor.
to ask you that when you speak about
And
marginalized groups, what happens to what happens to the poor who may have the
they are
accident of being upper caste but have no
they
other
are
benefit or no
marginalized.
other privilege?
I would simply, remind you of what Lohia used to say. When Lohia said "Pichra paave so mein saath," his Pichra did not mean only SC, ST, and OBC. It included minorities. And Lohia used to say every woman, irrespective of her caste or class, is part of that Pichra. So you have to have a cross-cutting understanding, which is about those who are disempowered, marginalized in one way or the other. It could be caste, it could be poverty, it could be gender. It also includes transgender groups. All these groups, so disadvantage of one kind or the other. if you say in a somewhat poetic language, dard se dard ka rishta ban. This is what politics has to be. Ek dard can be that of Dalit, another can be that of a Muslim, the third can be someone who is a woman, fourth is a poor upper caste. You have to connect that coalition has to be made. It's a long-term historical process. And if the demand for caste census is one step forward in that direction, I can only welcome it.
Yogendra ji, it's been a very interesting and educative conversation. We'll leave it there. Thank you. Pleasure as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.